Our next speaker is also a homegrown Michigan person. Dr. Tanya Dewey graduated with a PhD from the University of Michigan in ecology and evolutionary biology. And since the year 2000, she's been involved with the Animal Diversity Web, of which she is currently the project director. Here to talk more about that particular web is Tanya Dewey. Please help me welcome her.
There are going to be a lot of transitions here. It's been an exciting morning and afternoon. Thank you for having us as part of this program. But I think the transitions that are going to happen now is I've seen a lot about exhibit museum kinds of experiences, or how you interpret to visitors. And what the Animal Diversity Web Project represents is more of a research museum, sort of a way of bringing research museum data into that public realm. Also, there's been a lot of emphasis on cultural materials, and this is going to be very, very biased towards biological collections. So forgive those perhaps abrupt transitions. So I'm here today to talk about the Animal Diversity Web. It's I'm going to be walking you through some very specific aspects of the website, but the bottom line message, what I really like to convey, is that we think the Animal Diversity Web and its successes are a model for other museum disciplines. So, and this will echo some of Ethan's statements earlier. If you think carefully about how you structure the data that you are in charge of curating and presenting to the public, if you think carefully about how you do that, if you invest in mechanisms that really help you to convey that information and create an intense database structure, that what you'll end up with is something that will be more useful than perhaps you could have imagined, and may ultimately end up in really expanding your impact tremendously. And I'm going to structure this it's very simply, but basically just a little bit about the Animal Diversity Web, what it is, a little bit about the history, and then talk about how we build it, or how we have built it, and how we use that database structure in education primarily. And this is, we'll focus a little bit on formal education as well. It's another transition here. So the Animal Diversity Web was founded in 1995. So, the other big transition is that this is actually all about an ancient technology called the World Wide Web. That's what we're using. So I'm not sure how much of an innovation that is truly anymore, but I think what we represent is an innovation in using that kind of resource. So Phil had this idea in 1995 about how to better teach students. Essentially, how to create opportunities for students to explore and discover patterns in ecology and evolutionary biology and organismal biology generally, how to allow them to discover these patterns on their own rather than lecturing to them about lifespan relationships with body mass or morphological variation, comparative anatomy kinds of things. Because really those are the best way to teach students is by letting them teach themselves, by giving them scaffolded, structured resources that help them to make those discoveries on their own. So this is the Animal Diversity Web homepage and the URL there. I hope you'll visit. Phil isn't, well, he just took off this morning, otherwise he'd be here with us. He just recently retired. So Phil partnered with two technology innovators on campus at the time, one of whom is here, Tricia Jones. And they helped him establish a database structure that could accommodate basically unlimited expansion to create a huge natural history database for animals. To do that, they used, this is all basically built on a classification, a taxonomic skeleton, so to speak. So all of the data are pulled together by a taxonomic name. And that's an advantage, I think, that the biological sciences have over perhaps some cultural museum perspectives, because we do at least have taxonomic name structures. But there may be other kinds of ontologies or semantics that other kinds of disciplines can use as well to help structure this kind of information. They also helped him develop a mechanism for managing different kinds of media, but most importantly, how to generate highly structured sets of information. So essentially, a way to create a structured database, but that is presented as a narrative. So I think that's another important point to make, is that, and actually she's not here anymore, but not so much the wow, like the wow, I have 1 million specimens in this database that you can download, but the why, the so what, Building narrative helps you to make the connection between these objects and their importance. So a couple of things I want to say about this. So this is what a species account looks like on the Animal Diversity Web. The Animal Diversity Web is basically a very large database of species accounts. But the thing to keep in mind here is that this looks like an HTML page, looks like a narrative. What it really is a number of very different of different data sources that are all pulled together dynamically on the fly via this taxonomic structure. So it is a dynamic database. That's very important. In 2000, we pretty much completely revised the template, and we include all of these 14 sections now in the taxon accounts. And so the majority of our accounts have this very highly structured level of content. It also includes data fields and a keyword, a controlled keyword vocabulary, which I'll talk about more in a little bit. So I mentioned that it's been online since 1995. We've been doing this for a long time. As a result, we have worked with thousands of students at 77 institutions, representing hundreds of courses. Many of our courses come back year after year. This has become really a core part of how instructors teach in these organismal biology courses. And over 3,000 published student authors have written over 4,000 taxon accounts, so it's a very big database. And we also have large numbers of images of different kinds. We have live animals, we have specimens, and we have some sounds. And this is the sort of lexicon that's used on the site to illustrate the content. Oh dear, that didn't translate well to PDF. Sorry. And also as a result of basically creating this very large database, having it being around for a long time, and the fact that there's an editorial process that we overlay over this that I'll also talk a little bit more about. We have a very good reputation, and we've become one of the largest and most reputable online databases in the world. So we serve every month about 1.5 million, or a little bit less than 1.5 million pages to over 400,000 unique visitors all over the world. Not even just the English-speaking world, although we're only in English. But we are a very large database. And that's because I think the other thing that I'm trying to say is that if you build these kinds of resources, people will come. There's a real thirst for information that gives objects and experiences meaning and can be used in education. So I'm going to walk through the process of how this database is built, and it's going to be very specific to animal natural history. But the goal is to sort of give you an example of how we've structured the database and how much thought we had to put into how you do this in order to both create the database structure and make that actual process a valuable learning experience as well. Because if I haven't clarified this already, our taxon accounts are written by students as part of their courses. So we want that experience to be meaningful to them, to be educationally valuable, so that what they're doing is getting value through that experience and then giving value to the database, which they can then use in different contexts again in the future. All right, so once again, this is a species account, and you can see the student is given attribution there. So this becomes actually a very important experience for the students as well in terms of being published. In some cases, this is their first publication. They use it for grad schools, job applications, things like that. So our goals And what I think we've accomplished is to essentially create a supported literature synthesis and scientific writing experience. So it has value for students and for their instructors. Both instructors and students get attribution. So if you were to go to a page and scroll all the way down, instructors get editorial attributions. So this is sometimes used in tenure and promotion review. This has value as we're not just parasites getting text on database, text on accounts from people. This is a valuable experience for them as well in that educational context. And finally, they get to contribute to this huge database. They get to basically be part of this. It's a little bit like a crowdsourcing or citizen science before its time. All right, so this is the recipe book portion. This is what essentially our workspaces look like. This is where people go to create taxon accounts. And you can, I hope, maybe see, or I'll just indicate that this is, and obviously these are screenshots. There's way scrolling, just forever. This is organized by courses, and then there are taxon signups and students. If I'm a student, I come to and I've registered with a course. I come to the site, and the first thing I want to do is select the species that I'm writing about. This is a very typical organismal biology assignment, is to write a species account. This helps students do a literature synthesis, do some research, and really think about and explore the natural history of organisms. So first I choose a species, and I can just enter it, or I can choose from a wish list. We've tried to make this as easy and as structured as possible. Because really this is, as in other kinds of scientific writing, this is a different language for them, so they really need support. The second step is always to get them to think about plagiarism, because you all know that it's just always very surprising to find out how few students really understand what that is. The next step is a copyright release. And this is really just because the Regents of the University of Michigan obviously we need to be able to use the material that students generate. This is actually not required. It just means that if the student retains copyright, if they're not comfortable releasing it, then it doesn't end up on the site. No big deal. All right. We also provide a lot of instructions, and this is what I'm really trying to get at, is how we support this writing experience. And it doesn't have to, what I'm proposing as a model is not necessarily a writing experience as much as a content contribution experience or a narrative contribution experience. So we immediately direct them to all of the different help resources that we provide on the site. They're always available through tabs on the top. There's always a way to contact us directly. So there's a lot of support. We then ask them to go and think about references, to go do some research, find the literature, and begin to enter those references. And this is also important from a data structure perspective because students have a lot of trouble figuring out appropriate citation formats, and they do it wrong a lot. So this helps to protect us from that. So they enter the citations in a particular format, and we automatically generate the parenthetical citation in the account. So this is an example of an account. This is actually the account that I've shown consistently, the Western Tanager account. So this is what it looks like in our background database without the association with the sounds and the images. And you see just a couple of sections here. Student selects that edit button on the habitat section. This is what they see. They enter text in this text field. Every text field, every field period is associated with some very brief help text. So they don't have to go to a manual or go to another tab to see the help. It's right there in front of them. And you'll also see that, those references appear automatically below that text section. So all they have to do to get the right citation format is select the box. If they do need more help, what exactly do I write in a habitat section? Then all they have to do is select the little question mark, and they get the full version of help. And finally, we have a very large set of controlled vocabulary keywords. This is essentially a semantic way of tagging the data. And because this is these are these are terminologies that the students might not be familiar with. We have, they can go directly to the glossary to get those definitions. So that's another way that we help them in this experience. And the last kind of data that I just want to show briefly is that we have numerical data. So students are actually entering numerical data and choosing units. But you can see that this is a very complex template, and we were initially a little bit concerned about that. This is a difficult experience. This is not traditional. They don't have experience with this kind of writing. But we've found that this highly structured template really helps them do well. And of course, it depends on the resources of the institution and their instructors, but in general, it helps them do well. The last kind of thing that we do that really expands the utility, the potential utility of this database, is that we create connections between species in the database. So we've created an ecosystem, or a set of ecosystem relationships here with predators. We also do other kinds of symbioses. And the last step, I promise, is the work process. So what we're doing is creating a writing experience, a research and writing experience in a course. And so we need to have control over who has access to the content at which points. So students, initially when they sign up, they have access to the content. They can then share that with their instructor. And then the instructor can share it with us. And there are different sort of rules associated with each step. But that helps us manage how these contributions take place. The other way that we've created a very structured database is that we have these image data are incredibly rich. But images are just images unless you have some way of finding the ones that are relevant. So we've created a controlled vocabulary, again, to implement with our very large live image collection. So here, and it's really hard for me from this angle to see if you can even see these words, but what I'm doing here is filtering all of our live animal images by feeding behaviors. So I can filter by a whole set of behaviors, by life stages, by anatomies. And these are things that we worked really hard on thinking about before we implemented them. But what we have now is a huge database where we can find cool stuff relatively easily. And that's the kind of thing that I think there's a lot of potential here. All of our software is open source. All of these tags we've shared with other projects. If there were more projects using this kind of tagging, this kind of data tagging and employing data structure, everything we have is extensible. So it's not siloed. It could be shared among databases, which is really what we would hope to see in the future. And similarly for our specimen images, which gets back to our museum roots, that we also implement a tagging structure. So that's how we're built. How are we used? So there are three things I'll go through. First, and in some ways, very importantly, we're used globally by millions of people. And this is really compelling. I mean, it's been, in part, it may be serendipity. It may be that we came online in 1995. And so there wasn't as much competition then, and we have a high Google rank. But I also think that it's because we've created a really unique resource, that we have data structure that makes us useful beyond just a simple HTML page or a simple, I found the account, I read it. And because we employ an editorial process, so it's recognized that this is high quality information, so we become widely used. We started wondering what these users looked like a while ago, and we did a survey. We started a voluntary survey in 2011. And sure enough, a lot of people are coming to us for education purposes. So almost 70% of our users are formal education users, which is pretty extraordinary, actually. It's amazing. And that translates into some huge numbers. So, more than 250,000 monthly coming to the site for education reasons. So, through all of these in all of these different ways, we've become a very sort of a flagship of museum-based resource that really answers a need or a thirst for public information on animal diversity. Another way that we've used these data, the fact that it's a very structured and dynamic database, is to repurpose the data in fairly specific ways to support particular kinds of education projects. So what I'm showing here is the entry, the sort of portal to our critter catalog. This represents a longstanding collaboration that we have with the U of M School of Education to create specific curricula that engage students in the process of science through exploring biodiversity and climate change. And the reason that we could do this relatively in some automated, semi-automated ways is that it's the same, it's basically the same information as in the Animal Diversity Web. I don't know why I picked on western tanagers today, just it's a pretty bird. It's just presented in different ways. And there's some easy ways that we can represent the data. So instead of saying physical description, we can say, what do they look like? We can just change the sort of format to make it more accessible to younger audiences. The more labor-intensive way that we had to change this was to actually rewrite the text. So that actually does take a lot of time. But it's been very valuable because we're now the only resource out there that has basically kid reading level text. And what we've done is fold this into our normal editorial process so that this, again, I'm back to the western tanager in the background. This first paragraph is tagged advanced. That's the one that gets sent to the ADW. The second tag is rewritten by our editors as the accounts come in and is tagged to go to the critter catalog. So we've kind of streamlined that process of creating these kid-friendly versions that will help support these particular education projects. And finally, again, this is just sort of reiterating that I think there's a real thirst for this kind of information out there. These compelling narratives based on real data. We've never promoted the BioKids site. It's purely a research product. It's been implemented in some fairly small-scale curricula projects. But despite that, it's now, just last month, we served 180,000 pages to 80,000 unique visitors from all over the world. So if you build it and it's compelling, they will come. So thirdly, how we use it, and most importantly, we can finally go back to the original goal of the Animal Diversity Web, which was to build this way for students to actively explore and discover patterns on their own. And we know that this is what education should look like, right? This is what works. Students actually doing hands-on learning, being actively engaged in the process of understanding things. But there are limitations to this. There are some institutions that have no capability for sending kids out into the field. There's always a limitation on the number of kinds of field experiences or hands-on experiences that you can provide. And many institutions lack museum collections, for example, to use to really be able to explore these patterns. And we can help to address that by providing a database like this. Serendipitously, again, for us, right around the time that the database started becoming sizable enough to really support these kinds of active learning experiences, this sort of independent exploration of the data by students, nationally there became some interest in actually revolutionizing how we teach biology, at the undergraduate level at least. And that is to really engage learners actively. So we built our Quaardvark. Okay, that's a really silly name, and I'm not going to spend too much time explaining. It's a historical contingency thing. You can ask me later. But this is our query tool. This is basically the tool that we developed in 2007 to create that portal through which students can ask questions, identify data that answer those questions, extract the data, analyze them on their own. So it looks like this. There's a query portion. You can say, I want to know everything about bats in North America. And then there's a report section. I want to know their mass, what they eat, what habitats they live in, and who eats them, for example. And I have a couple of other examples. So I do that. I select bats. And this is another way that we find little tools to help support students in this kind of process. Students are not going to spell scientific names very reliably, so we help them. And then this structure actually, it parallels the data structure of the database. It looks very complex, but what we've found with students is that once they've done it a couple times, it's really not that hard. And one of the really neat parallels is that a lot of our classes now actually have students do both. So they start the semester with a species account writing process. They learn, they sort of become familiar with this structure, and then they do exploration of all the other data that have been contributed by students throughout the years. You hit submit. It usually only takes a few minutes. Or, I'm sorry, not a few minutes, a few seconds. And this is an example of these results. This is actually that I want to see all the Nearctic bats and what they eat and what their conservation status is. And I wanted to see something about their jaw morphology, so that shows up here. But all of these, there's a really rich opportunities for active exploration here, and not just with morphological things, although I'm going to have one other example. So this is a really classic comparative morphology example. These are actually three very, very different groups of rodents, but they're all adapted to very similar kind of lifestyles in different parts of the world. They're all saltatorial. They are all mainly in arid places, eating grains. And we have enough data in the database that students can actually do this kind of really rich morphological and ecological comparison with these species, for example. So this is what the results look like. They can actually, they can expand the skulls. They can look at them in detail. There are many different views, and most of these have scales on them, so they can actually use something like JImage to do measurements and actually collect data as well. And finally, it's not just images, although we do have a lot of them, and those morphological explorations are very rich. We also just have tons and tons of data. So students do just mine the database for lots of numerical data and actually do data analysis kinds of explorations, even for statistical classes with these data. And then just a reminder that we also tag our live animal images. And as a result, the live animal images and other kinds of images actually become the data. Another overlap issue. So we've been doing this now for 8 years, and we're now this query process is now used in over 30 institutions across North America, and by thousands of students. And we've had very good results in terms of student abilities to actually ask and answer questions and then feel more confident about their own scientific abilities after this kind of experience. So this is sort of, I think, my summary message, or maybe how we got here. It's not just a database of specimens, but a way to demonstrate how they're cool and relevant and place that in a narrative context. I think that's a message that could be relative to other museum disciplines as well. Using this kind of community effort, are there examples of other kinds of student work that is very typical in a cultural museum or teaching context that then ends up just being recycled? Is there a way to use that kind of effort to create a resource that will be useful to other people in the future? And use these tools to engage learners, actively through the process of discovery, and to answer this clear public thirst for information that's really compelling and rich. So this is when Ethan was giving his talk. I was like, yes, this is great. invest energy into thinking about how to structure your data. Invest energy into thinking about how you're going to manage this. Make it, really invest in thinking about what the potential uses are, and you won't be able to imagine them all. But promoting this discovery as a way to enrich education in your field is very, very important. All right, so that's the thank you slide. We've been well supported. Thank you very much for your attention.